2025 has actually been a really good year for horror so far. Normally, horror can be quite a mixed bag, but as I was watching for research, I kept coming across banger after banger after banger.
After banger!
And so, I'd like to share with you what I consider to be the best horror films I've seen so far this year. There's a bit of everything here, from big name releases to smaller productions that may have flown under your radar. There's some straightforward, no frills, capital H horror, and some films of a different flavor, taking the genre and getting a bit more out there and creative with it. If there's a horror movie that isn't on this list that you think should be here, be sure to let me and others know down in the comments. So without further ado, and in no particular order, here are my favorite horror films of 2025 so far. I think some of the scariest existential films I've seen have had to do with aging. You can't tell me The Father isn't one of the most gut-wrenching, terrifying films of the past few years. The Role of Jenny Penn takes themes of aging and the loss of your own independence and concocts a bizarre, often funny nightmare in an assisted living home being terrorized by a man with a puppet. Seriously, who knew Farquaad had this kind of freak in him? John Lithgow is so entertainingly goofy in this, yet manages to be quite frightening in moments where he holds all the power. And while I think it's a bit contrived, I think his character has a really interesting reason behind why he's being such a dickhead. Outside of that, the film plays with perception and reality to further drive up the dread as our main character struggles to sometimes realize what's real and what isn't. You're not going to find a lot of blood, gore, or big jump scares here, but rather a haunting reflection of the state of elder care and how that age group can be ignored or taken advantage of. But there's a handful of crowd-pleasing moments that ultimately felt very satisfying, making this a very odd thriller that may just give you a good time. Old age fables, much like the works of the Grimm brothers, have always been steeped in horror, so it's always nice when a story not only goes back to its roots, but actually recontextualizes and reshapes the story into something totally unique. That's essentially what The Ugly Stepsister did, taking the well-known story of Cinderella and telling it through the eyes of her stepsister. Incredibly haunting and darkly funny, this Norwegian film decides to take these core ideas around beauty and appearances and warp them into an uncomfortable body horror film. The stepsister, played compellingly by Leah Myron, is given a lot more depth this time around, being just as much a victim of societal pressures and circumstance as Cinderella was. Even though she's on the side with all the power, she is still told how to look and how to change to better fit into her social class. At first it's just things like hair and clothes, but when it starts to get a bit more flesh deep, that's when the stomachs start to churn. A bit of pity remains with her throughout, but after enough time, this kind, love-struck girl is warped into a hateful and brutal individual. While I can't really say the film is frightening throughout, it still has stellar character moments that are eventually rewarded with gnarly bodily mutilations. I usually have a pretty strong stomach for stuff like that, but there is a scene at the end of this that, I kid you not, almost made me vomit. It is repulsive and so well executed, but if this was earlier in the movie, I may have had to turn it off. So if you think you have the stomach for it, I would definitely give the gothic character study a try. Just maybe no food beforehand. Specifically pasta. So this is technically a 2024 release, but it didn't find its way into American hands until this year, and it's just so much fun that I really wanted to talk about it. Dead Talent Society envisions ghosts and hauntings as an entire business where the dead chase notoriety and virality just as much as the living. Think of it as a cross between Monsters Inc. and Beetlejuice. It's such a cool concept, viewing urban legends as lucrative businesses that dominate the talks of the afterlife, much like celebrities do for the world of the living. It's super energetic, colorful, and incredibly campy, making this most likely the lightest watch on the list. Despite that, I think there's a pretty touching message about being valued without having a big, glamorous talent. The more tender moments are effective, but aside from that, it's incredibly silly, never being afraid to get really absurd with its scares and gore. At times, it reminded me a lot of House, getting really playful with the editing and setups. The cast is a ton of fun, with Chen Bolen's Afterlife manager Makoto being the standout for me. Maybe the quirkiness and weirdness won't be for everybody, but I had a blast with this, and it's on Netflix now if you're interested in checking it out yourself. This next one is a bit more of a thriller, but bear with me. Vulcanizadora is the story of two men who take a trip into the woods to fulfill a disturbing pact. I'm pretty sure you can figure out what kind of pact that is. Honestly, the first half of the movie is just them talking, with one of them growing more and more uncomfortable with the deal. They try to hide it through jokes and gags, but that looming inevitability never leaves your head, and it is revolting. Not in the graphicness of what's about to happen, but the sheer agony of the buildup. It's a genuinely painful watch, as nothing I've seen this year has had my stomach in knots like this did. The two friends' dialogue is so realistic, but also so unique. I knew people who talk like this, and to see them replicated to a T like this is genuinely impressive. And then halfway through the movie, when you think everything is about to come to an end, it just keeps going, leaving you with the brutal harshness of reality to simmer in for another half hour. But it's not just mindless psychological torture porn. It dissects the vulnerabilities of masculinity, a need to atone for your sins in a way that isn't actually beneficial to anybody. It's a reminder that humanity, brotherhood, and love is never off the table, but we can become blinded due to our own twisted views of justice and needed suffering. It's a whiplash of a movie that will have you laughing at a couple losers in the woods that will quickly have you pulling at your hair as they march towards an incredibly avoidable reckoning. When it's time to get down to business, this thing is so expertly paced, never in any rush to get to the end, which just makes it all the more painful. It's not going to scare you like some of the other entries on this list, but it will leave you with a feeling that's absolutely going to haunt you. Also, this thing is apparently a sequel, but it doesn't really seem like you need to see Buzzard to understand this, so don't worry your pretty little skull about that. Sometimes I feel like I am the only one who likes Osgood Perkins. Sure, Longlegs wasn't the pants-crapping horror film its marketing made it out to be, but I thought it was still a damn solid film that showed a lot of promise from the guy from Legally Blonde. The Monkey is another solid example of his talents, and this is a pretty fun horror comedy with a dark, often off-putting sense of humor, with halfway decent meditations on death and mortality. It's fully aware of its absurd premise, but it doesn't get too irony-pilled either, taking itself just seriously enough while still leaving some room for goofing around. I do kind of wish it got a little more out there though. The climax definitely understood the assignment, but I think there was room for a bit more absurdity. Even still, I had quite a fun time watching this and kind of need to see it again. Theo James does a solid job pulling double duty as both a kind of pathetic and kinda evilly cringe twin brothers, while Christian Convery does the same for when the brothers were kids. Meanwhile, the kills are absolutely a ton of fun, managing to be over the top but still pretty revolting at times. I was just reminded of that horse trampling kill and I'm just gonna move on from it. It's far from perfect, but far from a bad time, so if you didn't enjoy Longlegs, maybe this sillier story will be more up your alley. Alright, look. This isn't really a horror movie that's probably gonna scare you. If that's all you really look for in a horror movie, then yeah, this one probably isn't for you. But if you like films that use elements of horror to complement more human stories, then you may just want to check this out. The whole thing is shot from the perspective of a ghost haunting a house, watching a new family's lives unravel while occasionally stepping in to do a little haunting. This often static, fly-on-the-wall style may not sound the most exciting, but director Steven Soderbergh just knows how to make even the most mundane things interesting. I'm convinced the guy could direct paint drying and still find a way to make it appealing. Every scene has some type of poetry to it, whether it be from how the emotions of the ghost are expressed through camera movement or how the family talks to one another. The characterization of the ghost is actually really well crafted, telling us so much just by how it moves or sheepishly looks away from people. But at the core of the film is a pretty heartfelt story of a family trying to navigate tragedy and change in their own misguided ways. It's surprisingly really moving, even though it eventually gets very silly with the introduction to a character that ends up monologuing like a Bond villain. Even still, this is a neat little experimental piece of horror that may not deliver on big scares, but it reminds us that having a good story can be just as important. This was one of the first signs that I had that not only were horror movies going to be great this year, but they were going to be some of the best films we'd get, period. Sinners has a lot of hype around it, so much hype that I fear people are going to be overhyped and miss out on what makes this thing truly special. It isn't a straightforward horror film hell-bent on making you jump every half a second. In truth, it's a horror movie, a period drama, and an action film rolled into one, leaning into each genre as needed and nailing every single one. At times, it's a social commentary on the exploitation of culture and its erasure through assimilation. Other times, it's a big, sweaty, grimy brawl fest that's pouring blood like it's corn liquor. Not to mention, every performance is phenomenal, perhaps the most engaging and likable cast of characters I've seen in any film this year. Michael B. Jordan brings a lot of uniqueness to twins Smoke and Stack. Jack O'Connell is a truly mesmerizing and fun vampire villain. Miles Canton is a hopeful sign of the future of Hollywood, and Delroy Lindo is Delroy Lindo. And that's really all you need. And then there's my favorite part, the music. This is such a great blend of blues, folk, and other surprising genres that have been in my rotation non-stop since I saw it. There is no way my most played song this year isn't going to be Rocky Road to Dublin. But it's not just catchy tunes, the music ties so well into the message of it being a conduit that carries cultures and customs to the next generation. People who have said this isn't a horror movie because it isn't loaded with jump scares or visceral gore really need to understand that horror is capable of so much more than that. It can defy the boundaries of genres, and that's exactly what Sinners did this year. If you haven't seen it yet, I highly implore you to make the time for it. After a stellar debut with Talk to Me, the Philippou brothers have added to their command-based series of horror films with Bring Her Back. And while I don't necessarily think this film eclipses the prior one, it's still a hell of a brutal time. Seriously, some of the best presented horror you'll see this year, with phenomenal camera work and stellar staging and blocking for each scene. It's easy to see how meticulously everything is planned, as the brothers manage to find the exact right way to let the story unravel and give you a good scare. The film gets very hard to watch in the best possible way, guaranteed to make your teeth hurt and your skin start to burn. But this is also incredibly well performed, with Sally Hawkins and newcomer Jonah Wren Phillips being some of the standouts. While I don't think it's the most unique take on the genre as a whole, especially with how much of a bedfellow grief and horror is with A24, but the cinematic voice the Philippous bring to the table is undeniable. Darkly funny, emotionally moving, and seat-squirmingly brutal. I think there's enough that's different here where, if you didn't care for Talk to Me, this might just win you over. But if you're like me, who thoroughly enjoyed it, this is just more of the good stuff. This movie has been quite the litmus test to tell if you know ball this year. Obviously, everyone has their opinions and preferences, but how can you watch this thing and not feel something? It can be incredibly gory, hilarious, and heartfelt at the drop of a dime, and I think the film nails each of those aspects in spades. This story of a boy traveling into hell on earth just to try to cure his mom is incredibly moving, filled with the kinds of bad decisions and overconfidence you would expect. But it all leads to a gut punch of an ending that makes this the only movie on this list that actually managed to make me tear up. But even outside of the sentimentality, this is still a batshit entertaining roller coaster to ride. The editing is so in your face and abrasive, the soundtrack is punk-laced and imposing, and the camera work is genuinely some of the most beautiful I've seen this year, horror movie or not. I was so shocked to learn that this film wasn't what I anticipated it to be, but in a way that was even better than I could have hoped. Its reflection on death and moving forward captivated me, while its zombie skewering left me howling. It really is a movie with a little bit of everything. Be prepared to laugh, be prepared to cringe, and maybe even be prepared to cry. You'll learn to believe a movie can do all that while still containing big ol' swinging zombie dick. Yet another movie that just knows how to juggle so many different vibes while still maintaining cohesion and excitement. Zach Cregger managed to blow his prior film Barbarian out of the water, and that was already a pretty tough contender. He just knows how to blend scares with comedy while still holding this down-to-earth identity that makes everything feel so real and genuine when it comes to its characters. The broken, fractured narrative is a ton of fun to see unravel, bleeding into previous scenes by providing new context that further thickens the plot. This gives every last character a chance to shine, with some of my favorite performances being from Austin Abrams, Carrie Christopher, and of course, Amy Madigan. But these performances go beyond simple character archetypes, having quite a bit of depth to them that makes them as loathsome as they are entertaining. And like Barbarian, this thing is way funnier than you may expect. While the film delves heavily into themes of mob mentality, the importance of parental supervision, and a fairly clear school shooting metaphor, this thing still finds a way to get incredibly goofy without completely destroying the unnerving aura the film worked to establish. It's one of the best horror films the year has to offer, while also probably being the most approachable from the horror genre. Never has a bunch of kids T-posing been so scary. And that's my list. Are there any horror films I left off or haven't covered? Let me know down in the comments, as well as telling me what your favorite horror film of the year has been. And if you enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like and hit the subscribe button if you want to see more movie reviews and movie-themed cocktails.